And we are live.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Legislative Review Committee meeting today, Thursday, December 5th. And we are here in City Hall. And I want to get the meeting started with an approval of the November 7th minutes.
Shall move to approve these minutes.
A second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Let's go public input. We don't have any public input, so we'll go on to the commission identified item of interest, and we'll pass it over to Manager Nikki Jones.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers. Just a quick recap of why we're here today. The Mayor gave us a charge to develop a process for creating new tax allocation districts or amending existing TADs. So at our last meeting, we had a presentation from the Economic Development Department folks. We learned a little bit about what a TAD is. We learned about how it actually works. We talked a little bit about the history, process a little bit. So today, we want to talk to you a little bit more and create some more context for you around TADs. So we'll give a quick recap, but we want to talk about, we've had some conversations with our attorney's office as well and our outside counsel on how you would amend the TAD, or whether or not you would actually have to terminate the TAD before you amend it. So we have some answers on all that stuff. But with that, I will turn it over to Dr. McConnell and Daniel Young, and I think they'll do a presentation for us. So I'll pass it over to you.
So Daniel's got a presentation. One thing I do want to say about the memo, because if you're like me, you're like, I want to read the memo. So the memo, we sort of realized from reading it again this afternoon, the reason that we asked Dan about the termination, the process for a termination of a TAD was that was our understanding, was that you had to terminate a TAD in order to amend it. That is not the case. You can just amend a TAD. So this memo goes through the process for terminating a TAD. So it's great information. It's good to have it. Glad he compiled it. It will be useful to have. However, we've also asked Dan to come back and tell us, well, great, tell us how to amend a TAD without terminating a TAD, since that was one of the key questions that we wanted to find out about.
So we're gonna look for some more information on how to amend.
Yes.
So we do not know, because I think with the termination, that came with losing some money, or the money was not going to, or it was going to stop.
Well, he kind of lays out the process for what happens to the funds if you do terminate a TAD.
Okay, but we don't know what happens.
The
to the-
amending part.
Okay,
So
that's-
basically, we didn't know what we didn't know, and we asked the question thinking it would give us the answer to what we were trying to figure out, but that did not happen. So he's gonna follow up with some information for us on how to amend it without terminating it. But that's helpful. At least we have this process too, and it'll be a good resource for us to be able to,
And I think
refer
that,
back.
well, and I do want to go on record, the part about the funding, I hope that's what I would be very interested. What happens to that funding if we amend?
yeah. Okay, yeah, so stay tuned.
Okay.
All right, so with that, thank you to Daniel for all the work that he has been doing, and he has put together a presentation to share some more information with y'all today.
Well, thank y'all for having us back and letting us present last month and again this month. This presentation focuses a lot on the questions that were raised back in November 7th. So Sarah, if you can jump over to the recap, the next slide, please. Really, the focus is that TADs, or tax allocation districts, are a redevelopment tool. So keeping that in mind, it's been said that any development in the area isn't a potential improvement. So the Georgia Department of Revenue certifies tax base. And again, that means we start TADs typically on December 31st of the year. We have 6 TADs presently, and each TAD has its own advisory committee between 5 to 7 members right now. And those committees are actively working on compiling information, receiving public input, and they're in various stages of generating those community identified priority lists. You have approved the first one, Mayor and Commission did rather, on August 6th. Second one is hopefully going to be in front of you for a January vote, and we're going to keep moving forward. Ideally, you'll see one a month in the next few months. That is the goal.
The question on that, on the January 1st, so does that indicate that that's to go along with the new tax year? So does, I assume that indicates that if we do make changes or amendments, we probably wouldn't want them to go into effect until January 1st.
December 31st.
December 30th,
Yeah.
right, but, right, since we're not doing anything now, we're really, if we were talking about doing something, it would be a year from now.
That is a question that we do want to clarify.
Okay.
When we're talking about the amendments.
Thank you.
So moving on. One of the big questions, we mentioned earlier that, or last month, that there's area-specific tags and project-specific tags. All of ours, R6, are area-specific. Project-specific really are very similar, borderline identical in how they're created. The difference is that typically the developer will approach us and say, hey, we have this idea, we have this project that we would like to do. And because they come to us, sometimes the feasibility studies, the absolute maximum return on investment, they'll have an idea and they'll have those documents ready for us as part of their presentation. So some of that groundwork is already done on their part before they've even done it. Now, I'm going to show you in a few moments examples of some project-specific tags and talk about how those things kind of come up that the developers will present. I did have an interesting conversation with one of our TAG committees this week and talking about sewer infrastructure and capacity. Might actually impact how some projects within Athens could come about. So developers might want to use that as an example to come forward with their ideas. Typically, when developers come to us with a project, we do want to stick with that pay-go, and that's what we've been doing thus far. And that's actually a really good method of holding developers accountable to the processes, because they're not going to be reimbursed until the funding is there. So they do the work first. As far as the termination, the natural end of the TAD, because this is really about a development, there is the potential, not necessarily exactly, but there is the potential that this project could, the life of the TAD might be shorter. Only because to terminate a TAD, all the debts related to it have to be covered. But if this project is one that can be done in a finite time or a single project, it could be done sooner, potentially. Otherwise, everything else is the same. The advisory committees, the process, the redevelopment agencies' involvement, all those things remain in place for a project or areas. So moving on, I've got 3 examples of Georgia project-specific TADs. Y'all have this on PDF, so please excuse the amount of information on this slide. Atlantic Station in Atlanta, this was almost sort of the kickoff for TADs in Georgia. The but for that, we can do this project, but for the existence of TADs, because we need to overcome, in Atlantic Station's area, it was the environmental impact of the brownfield from, I believe, the former steel industry was what occupied that space. So they had a lot of environmental remediation to take care of. There was also the idea that to make those areas accessible, they needed bridges to cross over both interstates. So otherwise, it was a wonderful area. It just needed that little bit extra. You'll see something similar in Clayton County with their Ellenwood Town Square, and that was rocky topography, and that was their but for. No developer wanted to overcome that high cost of getting through the terrain. And then if anybody's been on 316 in the last few years, you head into Atlanta and you see the big nets on the south side of the highway for Top Golf. That's the exchange. And the exchange was a project specific tag. And the same thing, there was the topography. And just like Atlantic Station, we had 85 and getting the infrastructure burrowed under the length of 85. So those were all examples of successful project-specific tags. But come back to the top paragraph, the Atlantic Station, rather, the last 2 bullets. So there's an asterisk next to the 2001 total, and there was just a little bit of confusion on their part about what factored into that property. But after a few years, so 2001 was behind the TAD started a few years earlier. But $7.1 million was the assessable value, excuse me, of their tax digest for that area. And then within a few years, it rose to 133 million. So that's just demonstrating the potential. So if we move on, there are three sort of bodies that dictate how the TAD works. So we have the Redevelopment Powers Law from 1985, and that's what brought it to Georgia. We have our ordinance here in Athens, which is Title I, Chapter 28, and that has 4 sections. And then we have the administrative policies. We're going to make this simple. Breaking those down, moving on to the Redevelopment Powers Law. So what does that cover? Well, on the 23 sections, it talks about what we need to do to make a TAD. So we have to have the redevelopment area that defines what those redevelopment areas are. Again, light was the keyword that we seem to use. Inadequate infrastructure, aging buildings, all of those criteria. It talks about how we formulate a redevelopment plan. And so we have those on our website, about 70, 80 pages a piece. It talks about how we establish the redevelopment agency, which as of 2011, that's mayor and commission. And then how we compute applicable taxes, the ad valorem rates, all of those things, and how that's certified for that December 31st date. The big thing is we're limited to 10% of the tax digest, or available tax digest. The interesting thing about that though is it's just to say, I sometimes like to say the obvious thing just to make it a little more obvious. That's not a geography thing. That's not 10% of our geography. That is 10% of a dollar amount. So that does fluctuate. We kind of touched on that a little bit in the last presentation, showing how they've risen and fallen in their percent of the tax digest. And it also talks about how we have to approach any sub-governments or anything like the school district and include them and what that school impact study entails. And then the TAD start and end dates. Going on to the ordinance, our ordinance really only focuses on 4 things. It's mostly about the advisory committees. So the ordinance discussed applying an advisory committee to each TAD individually or each TAD area. It gave them purpose and meetings and dedicated staff and resources, which is my job. So thank you for that part of the ordinance. And then as of, I believe it was October 2022, the board authorities and commissions rules to apply to those advisory committees. So we're operating under that. Final one is the administrative policies. And this is sort of the process that involves the developers. This is the day-to-day moving forward. So developers will come to economic development. We have opportunities for them to find us on ACC.gov's website and in Best Athens. When they do so, we're going to consult with them. We want to do that beforehand because our policies have a non-refundable application fee. So we're going to give them consultation, work with them and talk to them about what the expectations can be as far as maybe an appropriate amount or things that we need to overcome to receive TAD funds. TAD funds, they're a little bit more public as far as input.
Daniel, what is that fee?
It is, well, it's 2 things. It's, I believe it's $10,000. And there is a sliding scale for an additional 3,000. I don't remember correctly.
So, and then they also pay the cost of our attorneys plus the cost of their attorneys for the process.
And the purpose of that sliding scale.
Commissioner Thornton?
Is that the norm in other districts and countries?
There generally, yeah, is a fee up front and the fee varies.
I'm talking about that high of a fee. I'm sure there's a fee, but are we doing something above and beyond in our request?
When we did the original research to sort of look at who's charging what, we tried to go down the middle for the fees that we found for different communities in Georgia.
Okay.
Can y'all talk a little bit about those fees, what they cover? And why we have fees up front?
So part of it covers the cost of the school impact analysis. And we have a third party that looks at a developer's proposal to sort of ground truth it or to evaluate the proposal and and whether it will pencil out, I guess, so to speak. So there's a fee for that study that's done, and the cost of the application fee is to cover that study.
And then there is now opportunity for a sliding scale based on the complexity
Mhm.
and how much that takes of our staff.
And this was after the mall tab, and we learned how complex a tab could be, because, correct me if I'm wrong, when we went to the mall tab, we were not charging as much. Is that incorrect?
Actually, it was when the Trinitas project
Trinitas,
came
thank you.
through for Lexington Road. The fee was, I think at that time it was $5,000, and then we went through and had that evaluation study up front, and we realized how expensive it was to get that done, but it's really important to have that outside kind of third-party analysis to look through the application and see if it makes sense for the local government, right, to kind of move forward with that. And so then we raised the fee a little bit so that we would at least be able to cover the cost of that third-party consultant to do the evaluation for us. Yeah, because we don't have that in-house talent. Plus, it's nice to have a separate set of eyes to look at things sometimes.
And so the advisory committee, after they have their review in the, that third party financial review, they'll make recommendations, which will come back to the mayor and commission as far as this is the request and this is what we want to recommend. Of course, similar to things you see, it's we agree with this request or we want to make modifications. I do want to point out, actually, Gainesville has some really fine examples online that we could share. We do have a stipulation within our policy that says TAG funding will not exceed 80% of the total estimated increment. That's just a interesting number that's put in there that I want to point out. And then lastly, there's a lot of input, but once we get to the point where we want to move forward with the proposal and what we've agreed to, then all of those groups, the legal counsel, our attorney's office, manager's office, staff members will all work together with the developer to formulate the community benefits agreement.
Daniel, on that 80%, is that, you pointed out that that's an interesting detail. So why is that an interesting detail? I mean, and is that a norm, again, following up with Commissioner Thornton's, like comparatively speaking? So if I'm a developer, want to do something, and there's $1 million there in the TAD, I can only request 800,000. I'm assuming, is this like a balance? You have to, what's interesting from your perspective?
Well, fortunately, we had an evaluation from a consultant back in the spring that looked at that and said that was a challenging number for us to meet. I'd like to find the document, see if I can't read that section to
You
you.
mean challenging and low or high? I mean, that's,
I think I kind of took it as almost difficult to determine.
okay.
I would like to find that
Okay.
section though.
Yeah, I
I
don't,
think the original intent was, to provide a cushion, right? Not
Okay.
that they, because sometimes those estimates, they're a little difficult, right? Because until you have an actual plan developed
Mhm.
that goes through plans review and is talking about the finishes
Right.
and the landscaping and the outside determination, when a project comes in originally for a TAD application, it's usually before a developer has gone as far as to
Mhm.
develop a plan, right? So the information that goes to the tax assessor's office is, we want to build a, mixed use development with, I'm totally making this up, 200 units. It's more vague. It doesn't show what the finishes are, and some of those finishes really help determine how the tax assessor's office will create an estimate of the value of what will be built. And until you get to a plan, and sometimes it's a binding plan, depending on what else is going on, like for example, the malls was a planned development, right? And they put down what they were gonna do. So the 80%, I think, originally was sort of a cushion, so that we weren't way at the max and that there was room enough, as like that plan got developed.
Thank you.
I think the advisor suggested that was potentially impractical in relation to most TAD deals.
Suggested what was impractical?
80% of the total estimated TAD. It's recommended, and we can talk about the recommendations, but it's recommended that, we maybe remove that 8% increment limit or soften the policy target rather than making it shall be.
Okay. And the third-party financial feasibility study, y'all, is extremely important. So I want to go back to the application fee. We talked about the application fee and how high it was. But what we want to make sure we do before we get into all of this is that when someone submits something to us, it was a ground truth. We want to make sure it pencils out before we go through the rigmarole of putting all the time and effort into it. So I want to point you to, I hate to bring it up, but Classic Center
A good example.
for the parking deck. A feasibility study would have been extremely important before we went down the road.
Mhm.
Where we, so I'm glad, that the economic development folks are thinking about this right now.
Well, when we did the Classic Center, was there at least a checkoff list?
I'm not sure.
I mean, I work with a lot of the developers. They talk about how complicated our development and zoning stuff is and all the different
Sure.
people telling us different things. And, the whole idea of the TAD is to bring in economic development. And so I'm wondering, are there, is there a layer of these 10 things gotta be, and that 10,000 may be part of that layer, but is there a checkoff list? And then the developer walks away and says, I don't mind paying that because, is there a checkoff list?
For the Classic Center, I'm not sure. I don't know how all that transpired. But we do have a checklist for TADs, if that's what you're asking.
And that's exactly what I'm asking.
We do. And that's just an application, so there's a list of things that
Okay.
the developer would need.
Okay.
So to just show you that process on the next slide. Several steps.
A lot of stuff.
That's condensed to one screen now. So, yeah, you see the, starting at the top left, this is where we're getting the advisory committees together to get that community input. We're gonna do per TAD area, at least 2 open house sessions, well, really 2 open house sessions and a public online survey. We're gonna take all of that and then the advisory committees will pull that information together and make a recommendation, what we're gonna call that community identified priorities list, which is basically assigning the percentage to total 100% amongst those 4 areas.
Well, so this process is actually, the community identified project process. It's not the process for when an application comes in.
That's next.
Yeah, that's the next one, sorry.
That's coming.
So with East Downtown and the 3070, there's this process, which we're going through right now with doing the community inputs with the advisory committees for each TAD. But this one is specific to East Downtown right now because of the 3070 split.
In fact, that second row in the middle. So now that they've got theirs approved, their priority, they're not rating their priorities, but they did allocate 40%, the highest percent to affordable housing. And so now what we're doing with the East Downtown TAD group is we are pulling all the affordable housing stakeholders. Habitat, Land Trust, our own HCD. We're pulling all these groups together and we're going to start talking about maybe how TAD funds could be used to incentivize developers to come into the East Downtown neighborhood. Really a credit to these committees that have been assembled. They've opened it up to all the other committees to come join us. So it looks like there might be a positive meeting. So we're gonna look at that as a one priority. We're gonna take that information and what we'll do is we'll keep the mayor and commission advised what we're doing if we have a recommendation. So, for example, this is simply an example, if they think that maybe doing environmental studies on some of the available parcels to take that off of the developer's plate or off their obligations and use TAD funds for that. That is just an example. And so we can, we'll seek your approval as all things with TAD. And that's when we start the collaborative process. Really from that point on, it goes into the consult. So we can go ahead and skip to the next one.
No, I got a question.
Oh, please.
Madam Chair,
Well, yes, yes.
you mentioned the.
I don't want the manager job.
Manager chair, oh my God.
Yeah, chair, just be chair.
The chair.
Oh, why not?
And you named the regular partner, Land Trust, Habitat. I do think that Commissioner Taylor opened it up for other public and private possible partners. You named the partners that we normally partner with, but I think she made a motion of change, or I don't think she made a CEO, but I do know she opened it up for other non-traditional folk that we normally don't do business with. So I don't want that to get lost.
Thank you. And I actually have presented that to the various committees as far as the recommendation that the mayor commission made to that first priority list before approving it. So everybody is being made aware of this. So this first meeting is not so much to get proposal for projects as it is to get what would make
Yeah.
affordable housing. It's more just just kind of brainstorming what do we want to see. However, if you do have any recommendations, I've already received other recommendations. I've invited some folks from UGA. I think one of the members, even one, Representative Fry, just to be aware. So
I might share, I just got this the other day, but, this sounds like it's an appropriate place to bring it up, just to get it on our heads. There's someone in my district who actually is in a public consultant, role in the Atlanta area, and he, sent this very interesting thing that in Norcross, where the county, I thought about you, Oviedo too, and when we talk about using county land, where the county actually put an RFP for affordable housing, and he shared the name. It's called Techie Homes. It's a minority-owned business there, and it shared the whole like sort of the little pictures too, which always look nice, right? But for affordable housing there, and I thought, oh, I was thinking that in terms of county land, but it's the same thing, I guess, what would going on where you'd be putting an RFP out in the same way. So, but I was just interested to see an example of it happening in North.
I think are they spelling Techie, Techie?
Yeah,
I think I got something on that too.
okay.
And when we went to, South Carolina for our retreat, everything that, well, they showed us the good stuff, that's how you do when you go on them stuff like that. But the things they did show us, and I do not think we do enough here or even make the effort, is more of the public-private partnerships. I think that this is an opportunity to at least start cultivating with private developers and I don't know, what was that thing that Spencer was president, home builders, something?
Builders Association.
Yeah, I think this is a good opportunity to start those conversations about public and private partnerships. I think that is one of the weak links for Athens-Clarke County to me. And then when we cannot fund something or have, even if it's a great idea, because of finances, the government can only do about so much, but when we put ourselves in this position that we can do everything, instead of opening up to some unusual houses. I would, as we move forward, I would hope that we would take advantage of those opportunities. The private may say they don't want to work with us, but I do think that we should.
Can we go back one, please? I'm looking for TAD administrative process, got all blue squares. There we go. Is it? Nope. Next one. Do you have the same? Oh. Are they different?
This is the last version you sent me. Is it maybe one hidden?
Slide 11, it's not.
Oh, yeah, that's what it is.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Sorry, y'all.
That's fine.
Getting it together. I know, I'm just gonna minimize this.
Weird. So this is the process when a developer comes to us then. So as we said, that first block is they come to us with the idea and we're gonna give them a consultation. That is, there's no debate about that. We want to give them the consultation, to have a thorough discussion. And it seems like we've learned that that's gonna be necessary. And that is something that we've seen in other counties and other cities do that. Now, the second part is, once we kind of work that out, and they do the formal application, submit that fee, and all of the other documents that are required as part of that, the plan and the financials, we cannot stop anybody from putting in an application. So I just want to be clear on that. Even if we say to them, hey, your project really does not make sense to us, in the unlikely event that that were to happen in the consultation, they can still put in for it. So we're gonna notify the manager's office that we've got this, and hopefully the manager's office would share it with you. At the same time, we're gonna talk to the advisory committee, so that they can start to review the process. So any initial process and any initial proposals would be presented to them as well. And we'll get that third-party financial that we've mentioned a few times already. And so the committee will take all that information, do a review, make a proposal, make a recommendation rather, to the mayor and commission, and then we're gonna go from there. We'll take a look at the CBA, and as I said, we're gonna have a lot of entities look at the CBA because of the importance of that as well. And, or at least what we've learned from the mall area. And after that, we're good to go unless we find any, as I said earlier, there's a lot of public input, there's a lot of moving parts, so there's a lot of negotiation and eyes on this, but once we get everything set, we can start moving forward.
Have their own individual CBA, or is it generic?
No, each TAD is going to have its own CBA.
Each TAD will have its own CBA?
Each project, each
Project.
project will
Yeah.
have its own CBA.
So the idea of the public input process for each of the 6 TADs was so that when the applicant is working on their proposal, we will already have what the community has said they would like to see in their TAD to give to the developer, and then the developer has that knowledge upfront. That was sort of the big learning from the mall TAD, was it's better if the developer knows upfront because it makes that CDA process less complex because they've already seen and kind of known doesn't have to be discovered or negotiated out necessarily right there in the middle of it. At least they'll know upfront and they can take that into consideration when they're doing their project and submitting their proposal.
Well, those 2 words do have significant differences, I think. Manager Jones for bringing it up, TAD and project, because it could give some miscommunication.
Okay.
Moving on, so I mentioned Gainesville earlier. Gainesville has a few projects. They're looking at a very small area within Gainesville, just a few city blocks. Some of their bigger projects are, one's called the National, so 144 apartments. and 132 room Marriott Courtyard, I believe, is under construction. There's gonna be an underground parking structure to go along with that. Another project about a block and a half over is the Enclave, and that's 45 townhomes, or townhome style areas, rentals. So they do have a different TAD advisory committee. Their most recent member was appointed to a 1-year term, which is a little different. So our TAD advisory committees are 3-year terms. To stagger those, some of our initial members are serving 2-year terms, but from that point on, everybody does 3 years. The TAD advisory committee, the TAC, to throw some acronyms your way again, they present the proposals to the mayor and council with those recommendations. What I did see was one neat thing was they said, we want to give this amount upfront specifically for this purpose, and everything else would be pay-go. I just thought that was a neat little area of the recommendation. And then again, everything is pay-go there. And most of their TADs right now have been 15 years. Or again, if they finish the project, pay off the debts, they can end even sooner.
Compared to the most recent one we did.
The mall was 29 years
Yeah.
and the other TADs and the redevelopment plans were set up for 20 years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Daniel, does Gainesville require a community benefits agreement?
No.
Okay.
Actually, we're doing about 5 other communities. We were the only one that specified a community benefits agreement. Others did specify community benefits, but we were the only one with the CBA.
One thing that Gainesville did that is different than the way that we did it is their planning department actually master planned the area. So they knew what they wanted to see there, what the look would look like, what the types of things they wanted. So that's one major difference. Like a developer knows, like, here's the master plan. And when they come in, one of the meetings that Caitlin and I sat in on with their TAD advisory committee was someone who was basically gonna renovate an older building to create a new business. So, he presented like his facade and the different improvements that he wanted to do. And the committee, I'm just gonna make up these numbers. He was asking for $50,000. The committee looked at his plans and they said to him, well, we like what you have in mind here, but that driveway is really old with a lot of broken concrete and, it's kind of a mess. And in order to achieve what we're trying to go for in this district, we would like to add another $25,000 for you to also remediate the concrete and fix it when you do your project. So that was actually kind of neat to see the committee say, in order for it to look the way that we're hoping for it to look and have the quality that we're wanting, we would like to offer you this to do the project.
Thank you for bringing that up, Ilka. And, again, I will draw a comparison to something that we're about to embark on over the Classic Center Arena Entertainment District. A master plan is not an uncommon thing, right? And a master plan signals to developers, the development communities, engineers on what we are looking for. So the entertainment district over at the Classic Center does not have a master plan.
Got it. Thank you.
It's also something to think about because a lot of these TADs are in major entryway corridors into our community or different parts of our community, right? Like North Avenue is coming in off the loop from the north. Atlanta Highway's coming in that direction. West Broad is sort of right in the middle before you're sort of on your way to downtown. So the idea of a master plan actually could be very helpful because every area in a community, unless there's a master plan, it sort of develops how it develops. But if you're trying to change the way something looks to make it look the way maybe the community would like for entryways to look or the feeling of their community to feel, master planning can be helpful just because that process of articulating and talking about like, this is what we want, not this, and just sort of talking that through and being able to create like a documented, sketched out, like visuals are so important to that. And like a sketch out, I think is really important because otherwise developers, people have a vision in their heads, but it's definitely not agreed upon necessarily because it's never been drawn out and put down. And then the developers are mostly coming from other places, so they definitely can't see it, you know?
Commissioner Thornton.
Well, and I think that is, probably so simple, but we don't do it. And I don't know why. And, but I do know, I think that, with all the different the 6 pad areas, having, even charrettes in some of these communities that would probably cost us little or nothing, or if we did it with the University of Georgia. I've worked with, Dr. Marian Alabanza years ago on a charrette around, communities around MLK streets, because they're usually pretty trashy. And how do you honor such a man when, so we did work in Augusta and South Georgia and several other places, so. I like to throw out the idea with the least start, I mean, that's another idea, we could do some charrettes.
I love that you mentioned that. I think the charrette is really important, right? Like for our viewing audiences, charrette is a visioning process. Usually you have some sort of facilitating group that comes in, but it's called a charrette, which is a French word for a cart. And it's because you bring in people with different types of expertise. So you might have like a transportation expert, and you might have an infrastructure expert, and you might have a retail expert, but it's these different people talking with the public, letting the public have their ideas, but thinking about it from a lot of different angles, and then taking all of the input and putting it all together. And the nice thing about it is it can tie different things, because you think about a lot of our corridors right now, you know, we have like sewer capacity expansions going on, and we have sidewalk projects and bridge projects and road projects. There's so many different bits, but a charrette is nice because it pulls them all together and helps people sort of think about all of the things that might be happening in that space together. So yeah, I love that idea of the charrette.
I guess the most recent, well, the charrette that I'm kind of familiar with,
The Bethel.
the Bethel,
Yeah.
the Bethel.
Right,
Yeah,
and we have those, you know, you're talking about that, I'm thinking about the Lexington Road and Atlanta Highway, where we have corridor plans. But you're pointing out too, that, you know, the corridor plan is a transportation and public works plan, and it's not necessarily like the image of the structures, like what you would want to see there, that other things, which I need, you know, I need help with too, you know, envisioning that. But it's putting it all together.
And you know, even when we were discussing North Avenue with the Raise Grant, and we heard a lot about trees and shrubbery and how, you know, we want this safe but beautiful place. That's the other thing that the charrette will do. It can do what's that word again? The beautiful stuff.
Beautiful stuff.
I think that's such a great point, because I'm just remembering the East Athens meeting with the inner East Athens neighbors. And I know sometimes when we, as a government, create a plan, right, like we're divided into teams of expertise, but when we go and speak with the public, I know even me, like, I don't just think about roads or just think about sidewalks or just think about trees or aesthetics, like in people's minds, the way you experience your community, it's
not
everything,
separated
right?
like that.
So, maybe,
Holistic.
yeah, meeting that in a holistic way when we do the planning, I think, I see exactly what you're saying.
Great.
So to touch on Gainesville one more time, this is what their TAC advisory, and then they call it the TAD Act. So this is what their TAD advisory committee. We love our letters. All of these positions, by the way, do specify, or their designee can attend. So we've got the Hall County Commission chairperson, their Gainesville City School Superintendent, because we have both Gainesville and Hall County. The Gainesville mayor, the Hall County administrator, the Board of Education chairman, the Chamber of Commerce has representative, the city manager. So we've got the mayor and the manager's office city school representative and then somebody representing the real estate that is their hopeful. So it's very, very different. So it's one for all of their TAD areas and all of their TAD projects. It's one committee.
And you know, really, with the real estate and the chamber, those are good examples of a piece of the private and public input that I do not see in some of the work we do here. So they're doing, they've had that piece kind of mentioned in their advisory period, so it's.
Yeah, and on the other hand, what you don't see is you don't see residents or people who aren't in power. It's like it needs a mix of two, because sometimes and in a way, mix of the two in a way that doesn't intimidate the residents without the leadership and power.
I would love to, I think we could take that whole combination and kind of mesh it together and make sure we have all that in there.
All right, and moving on, so we do want to touch on the other issue that, would be our question we're focusing on is amending a TAD. Obviously, the decision or the request rather to amend the TAD could come from a developer, a parcel owner, or it could come from our own legislative body. So when that happens, we do want to see the request come in. So December 1st of the year is probably is really the deadline. So we're past that deadline right now. Again, we'll look at the dates specific to amendments and get back with you. We do want to talk about that 10% of total tax digest, because when we're amending a boundary, we have to recalculate and see what that is 10% of the total digest and whether we can absorb that new geographic boundary for the TAD. Again, I'll come to a work session for the Mayor and Commission explaining what we're looking to do. And we have to do an amended redevelopment plan for what would effectively be a new border. That's going to go on the agenda session, and everything with that, there's a public input. So we will open it up for that. We'll have to get the area recertified again, which is December 31st or up to 60 days following that. So they can have until February to actually certify it, but the December 31st would be the start. Again, we'll double check on those dates for you.
And we'll share the information that Dan sends us in the next several days regarding the process and what happens to the funds when the TAD is amended.
And Dan is the attorney.
Oh, sorry.
Dan-
Our third party,
Sitting right here.
our third party legal counsel for the TADs.
I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
All right.
That's now. So we're gonna reset the tax base. Which means that, for the boundary, the old increment. It sort of goes away to make room for a new calculated increment. So we're gonna have a new threshold to meet before we start putting funds aside into the TAD.
So, I mean, with this is simplifying things, but if these TADs were working so well that the majority of our development in Athens was going on into the TADs, then when you reassess them for redoing them, that TAD would have more in of the tax base. But, and I'm just doing the math here, so that's not, so it's just that it's gonna change because we can't go over that 10%, so that's why that's all important. Okay.
10% is part of the state law.
Yeah.
Well, I think the 10% rule is just when the TAD is created or amended, right? In the meantime, the 10% might.
Right, but
fluctuate.
if we make changes,
Yes.
no, right.
When we make changes or when we were to add a whole new tab,
Right.
if we want to. Yeah. So, I think we can move on. I think we're about done. I mentioned earlier that we had a review of our administrative policy from KB Advisory. They had some phenomenal suggestions, streamlining the process, to remove redundant layers, and those were typically notifications. Let's tell the manager's office we have this, now let's tell the manager's office we have this step, and they're doing the same to the mayor and commission, they're coming to you with each step. And there's feedback, coming back and getting the public input and feedback to the advisory committee. So we can streamline that process. One way that we can streamline that process is to potentially consolidate those advisory committees into a model such as Gainesville or other jurisdictions where they have one advisory committee over everything. Gwinnett has the same thing. We're recommending possibly removing goals and priorities burden from the developers. That's gonna prevent, from that memo that I'm mentioning, it's gonna prevent conflicting policy priorities. We wanna talk about, those are our goals. So when the developer comes in, then it's possibly on us to see how that development we can work our goals on that instead of putting it on the developer, because what that does is that puts a lot more burden on the developer. That maybe takes all of the incentives of TAD funds and just wipes them away, because now we are asking them to apply those funds to certain goals that we're looking at. So.
Can I ask a question about that?
Please.
I mean, if we're still saying those are our goals, and ultimately what we're doing is giving a tax break, a financial incentive to these developers, if we take it out of the process the way you're suggesting, how do we still ensure that this project is worth our investment based on our goals? Like, are you just saying that we would analyze it on our end without forcing them to give us the information up front, or what's the idea there?
So the way that the mayor and commission designated the 4 goals for the TADs, the project will need to meet that anyway in order for it to get approved, right? Affordable housing, economic development partnerships, CCSD and youth development and public infrastructure. So that's it for Athens. Y'all have designated those are the things, and a project has to show that it is going to use the fund in some way to forward the mayor and commission's goals in those 4 areas. You're talking mostly about then describing it on that application, is that? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So I guess my question is, how would we know that they are satisfying? What are you all proposing we would do to understand that they are actually satisfying those goals if we're removing that from their application?
Well,
I think really staff can help in that as far as the part of our conversation back and forth with the developers as they're putting the application in.
because, and that's a great point, staff is still going to be heavily involved, maybe even more so when we're talking about TAD dollars. I lost my phone, oh, thank you.
All right, I mean, I think what you're saying, Jesse, too, if those are still the goals and priorities, then there has to be some way for developers to know that, whether it's a checkbox there or in the process.
Not only does there have to be some way for the developers to know that, but there has to be some way for whoever's ultimately approving.
Right,
the agreement
right.
to know that they're reasonably meeting those goals.
And so how are we removing what is the burden actually? Is the burden
Mostly
having the goals?
Filling out the paperwork, right? Like, so this is mostly having to do with our internal administrative policy and the
Yeah.
application that the developer is filling out. And I think for a developer, especially if they're coming from externally, upfront, they'll receive the priority list and the recommendations approved by the mayor and from the TAC, like public
Yeah.
input, the TAD advisory committee to the commission for that TAD. These are the things the community wants to see when they're developing their application. They may not know as much context, big picture, right? That's sort of what they know if they're coming from the outside, but those conversations with staff and the developer is, we see that you're doing a project for this. These are the 4 goals that the mayor and commission have set up, for all of the TADs, and this is what the community would like to see as part of your project for this area. East Athens will be a little bit different because the increment is already sort of split into community versus developer. But for the other 5 pads, that'll be a key part of it.
Okay, so
The burden is like for the developer to have to articulate.
Can you just have a
So,
checkoff?
yeah, I understand that. Like, so the idea that we have an onerous process for developers makes sense to me. And I mean, we hear that about plenty more than just this.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
planning departments, what we've tasked them with asking of people for applications is pretty onerous too. And that's kind of a problem nationwide. So I think there's a lot of room for this government to improve in making things less onerous for developers up front, whether they're a single family owner trying to do a modification of their house or a major developer pursuing TAD money. What I'm not understanding is, so I'm thinking about having been involved in the mall thing. Any analysis I read about how that project was meeting those goals was based on staff responding to what they had put in their application.
Mhm.
So if we're taking that out of their application, how are we, as the people who have to vote on this, going to be given sufficient and clear information that's accurate and vetted on how they're meeting those goals? See what I'm saying? Like, where does that information start being gathered? Who's gathering it? Who's analyzing it? How's it getting presented? If we're not making them initiate it in the application, where does that
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah, I understand what
Yeah.
you're asking. So these suggestions were from
The
KD Advisory, which is an external third party, but they specialize in TADs. So do you want to share a little bit from their set of recommendations, what specifically they were suggesting?
And let me just
And
add
we
something
don't
in
have to
here.
take their
No,
recommendations.
let me just add something in here in terms of like in the TAD hole and discussion. Well, we can continue with this as needed, but I just want to remind us that this committee, the LRC, is supposed to develop a process for creating new TADs and amending them. So this looks like, I mean, we're getting into an evaluation of the criteria, like this is like getting off
Scope creep.
Scope creep here,
Yeah.
which is, might be interesting for all of us here, who love this scope creep, but it's not, might not be pertinent here. So just, we don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole
Okay,
here.
okay.
So they just have two quick sections that I'll touch on. So the TAD development agreement is already very complex. It's detailed legal agreement. So our procedures right now define the drafting and revision of a CBA as an open, collaborative public process shared by elected officials, appointed board members, and community members. It's recommended that that's too broad. The TAD development agreement, being complex, and detailed and a legal agreement, should be negotiated and drafted by experienced professionals who are very familiar with the project. So they are recommending that it go towards the backside of the legal process, the contract drafting at the end, instead of as early as we may start.
So,
No, if you're still on that, I have a different question.
well, I guess I'm just thinking, I mean, Kara's point's well taken about what our assignment is, but if I think about the scope creep point that you're making, I mean, that kind of feels like this whole slide is scope creep from the committee assignment, right? So it's
That's
like,
right, that is true, so. but
if we're
that-
going to discuss this
presentation.
slide, there's
Yeah.
plenty on here that I'm like, that sounds like a great idea, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, but I
But
think,
if we're not gonna discuss this slide, then,
right, I think probably discussion of this slide could do with, at other point when it becomes a more of a priority in terms of the LRC goal. So this is good to know, because we all are involved with TEDs in other ways, but I think we could move on for digging into this. Commissioner Thornton?
Okay.
So that, Jesse, I guess you'll say the same thing to me, because I really am, we got that, the BAC
Yeah, right.
survey, and one of the things on the
Right.
survey was the combining of, the TAD into one TAD. And I wanna know what the benefit, what was the I'd like to know a little bit more of the rationale of one TAD instead of the 60.
So not one TAD, but one TAD advisory committee.
My point.
Well, so right now, we actually have 7 TAD-related advisory committees. We have one for each of the 6 TADs, plus we have the MARC for them all. The MARC needs to stay because it is part of the redevelopment plan, because the Board of Ed and the Mayor and Commission are both bodies are contributing funds, so that's sort of part of that structure. But the other 6 involve fully staffed, there or fully peopled. It's 42 different people and 6 different committees. And the committees have a 3-year commitment per term. It is very difficult for that many committees and that many people to even get a quorum for some of our committees. It's something that we've really struggled with. And in the audit, economic development was audited this year by what do we call it? It's the internal audit, but
Office
it's
of Operational Analysis.
Office of Operational Analysis. One of the things that they noted is one of the requirements, the ACC Gov requirements of boards, authorities, and commissions like the data advisory committees is, they go through a series of trainings. We don't have great compliance with ours. We have a hard time with quorums with many times, and it's even more difficult for people to go through 2.5 hours of online trainings and complete them. It's just tough. It's a lot of people to coordinate, at the end of the day.
Well, that probably answers my question, because we see that in a lot of other of our BAC committees, so,
We will be discussing that more clearly when we get.
I'm gonna come back to, because I get it, I totally get it, the form is important, I get the work done. And a lot of people, when we ask to serve on these committees, they're all excited at first, and then life just kicks in. And, it's not their top priority no more.
The other challenge, I think, is there's a lot of onboarding for people TAD is a pretty complex financial tool, right? And it can be really difficult to help the group come up to speed if they don't really have any background in local government, Robert's Rules of Order, conflicts of interest, tax allocation, property taxes, all of the infrastructure things that are involved. It's hard to do that for 42 people. And they sort of onboard at the beginning of their 3-year term, but they may not see a TAD application until year 2. And by then they may not remember all of the onboarding. And so some of it is logistical because it's so many different people, and some of it is just making sure we have a group that is able to form a quorum, work together and sort of understand what they're being asked to do.
Well, that is always a challenge, because we always talk about inclusiveness and diversity. And I don't know where the reality is for all the reasons that you just stated. I just do not, I'm only gonna speak about North Avenue. I do not want North Avenue to get swallowed up by people who are, they already see the benefit, so they're gonna hang in there. The folk that really need to be there will fall apart. I just don't want them to get lost in.
Yeah, and that seems to be the balance. I mean, that seems to be the balance there.
That's why the idea was maybe you take 2 representatives from each of the 6, so then you have representation from each of the TADs, from whoever is determined to be a good representative for that area, and then they can bring their knowledge of the whole, even if the application is not from where they're.
More like a SPLOS, the T-SPLOS committee, that kind of mixture, so. Okay,
Okay.
how are we doing with the slideshow?
One more. We're working on, public input sessions, so we're trying to schedule Left Broad and Hawthorne in January and February. And working to get, North Avenue to come together for a quorum so we can schedule some time for that. So as I mentioned earlier, lofty goals, but hopefully the mayor and commission will be voting on, the remaining 5, starting with Newton Bridge Road in January, one after the other.
Yep, so actually that'll be, Newton Bridge Road's gonna be, the community identified projects will be in December 17th.
It's gonna be December 17th.
Agenda setting.
And then Lexington and the mall are in the process of prioritizing input that's already been collected.
Next week, we'll get moving forward on both of those.
I think when we met with the agenda setting meeting yesterday, and you did, read out the Newton Bridge Road.
Priorities.
Priority, that's, you read it to us, and I guess you're gonna give it to us before the meeting.
Yes, ma'am. That's an agenda item. Yes, ma'am.
Can I get it before then? I'm asking,
Agendas are,
I'm sure, yeah.
yes.
And it's bizarre.
No, I didn't, he read it to us. He did read it to us. It's there. I'm just
So, We
wondering.
can send that out.
I mean, I'm the only one that is interested because that is, like I said, Newton Bridge is new for me. So that's the only reason.
Yeah, that part's not gonna change. We may clean up like grammar stuff
Yeah.
and stuff, but none of that.
You can read all 12 pages to them.
Just the priority list. And it's interesting because every tab, and understandably so, because they're different geographies, are gonna have a different set of priorities. And I was articulating the priority for Newton Bridge's infrastructure.
Yeah, they're 100% on infrastructure.
And they should be, because there's none over there.
So is this our last slide?
It is.
It is.
Okay, so I am actually gonna bring this back to what our mission is here with TADs from the mayor to create new tax allocation districts and amend existing TADs. So this seems like a next step for what the TAD office, for whatever it is gonna be working on. But I don't think this is necessarily a next step for what we have to be doing here. I think that one of the things I thought about here with when the timelines that you presented and such, make it clear that if we're putting together a process, because it's a process for creating tax allocation and amending TADs. Now, that we have to get that process done. Like if there's any, if we want to even consider doing it for next year, you don't obviously start the process in November or December. It's going to be started much earlier than that. So in order for that even to be considered, we need to have a process to move forward with in the, I'd say in the first quarter of the year. So,
So the good news is, sorry to interrupt, is we've got the process for creating new ones.
right,
We know that process.
okay,
So how to do it anyway.
yeah,
But maybe the discussion of whether a new one is needed is the next step on that piece. For amending existing TADs, we have basics, we need a little more clarification for Dan McCray, which we think we'll get in the next
yeah,
couple of days. And then same thing for that is whatever the discussion or determination that
Well,
piece, like we know the
yeah.
actual steps.
but I think the process for the commission is not just the process of setting them up, but it's a process of deciding whether or not we need to do that. So that needs to be a part of the process that we give back to the mayor and the rest of the commission, not just the logistics of changing it and the numbers, the math. So that if we have to add something to the beginning of that process, it says there's some kind of presentation of a need,
Yeah.
it's discussed and go forth. So, I'd like to see us moving forward here with this, because I think it's important to move this forward faster if we're actually gonna do anything with it in the next year.
What do you mean? Huh?
I mean, like, if we're gonna get this, if the.
Maybe I didn't ask that question right. I know what you meant. But what I'm saying is, do you have a thought or a recommendation?
No, I have just a recommendation that we get a draft, we actually work on a draft of this process to set one up for the
We can do that.
the goal is to set up a process for creating it and amending it, not to create them or amend them. Like we are not tasked with creating new ones. We're just we're just tasked with creating that process to do that.
May I
So-
make a suggestion?
What?
I'm wondering if right now what we could be doing is some data gathering, like looking at, working with the tax assessor's office, looking at how much the properties in each of the 6 TADs have increased since the TADs were created in comparison to the digest as a whole, like to see which TADs actually have had a lot of action in them versus ones that are still not TAD action, just development action, because one of the questions is the ones you have, are they growing? Are they growing anyway?
Okay.
And then another question might be from a planning process, which is linked to the value, right? Is it, what projects have come in on each of the TADs since the TADs were created?
Well, and I think maybe I'll ask Kelly a question, you might have the same thing, is this request, as I'm reading it, is not a
Think about the
request.
deliverable.
Yeah, the deliverable is not a deliverable and saying, well, we need to do this and this, and we have to add this. It's just the process for beginning that. So do we even, I mean, one of it is to evaluate the, the first step in the process seems to me to be evaluate whether, what the percentage is. Not that we have to do that, but to evaluate that. And then the next step is to, list some sort of need that would, where you had a certain area that it's really the redevelopment, identify that. Two, then you go into the technical part, like after that's agreed on. So that's just what I will clarify with Kelly as well, because that's how I'm reading this. Not that it comes through and we're given a request, because that's what happened with him, right? He brought those requests that have to do with the Beechwood area, and then we're like, wait a second, there's not a process, you're just giving us this.
That's exactly-
So, that's Commissioner Hull.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of going where I was going. I mean, yeah, my understanding of why we have this at all is because months ago, it was a year ago at this point, yeah, Beechwood,
Yeah.
right? And then everyone was like, where's this coming? Exactly what Carol said. And so I thought it was pretty narrow, just like,
Yeah.
okay, someone comes to someone and wants to tweak the boundary, we need to figure out, and then it blew up this whole thing where we were like, can we even do that without resetting the values, everything and all this?
Yep.
And so while I think that today's presentation was valuable and gets into things that are very worth considering, it actually feels to me almost entirely outside of what the assignment
Well,
was.
the intent with the first two presentations was just to orient,
Orient us toward
on the
that,
tags.
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so I agree, we need that, the deliverable is a process. I agree with y'all.
Yeah.
And so then I guess the other question is, when we see a suggestion slide, which of course I see before the presentation, and kind of arrive here like thinking, okay, I want to know about this. Like, are those suggestions that you're just letting us know, like, we're running with this anyway, or are you actually seeking this committee's feedback on any of the stuff that's been discussed today? Are you seeking this committee's feedback on?
I think it's just maybe information that on things that we would recommend in the future. But I agree that if we were just looking at the suggestions slide, that's scope creep. I believe the deliverable also is a process by which you create a tab or embed.
Yeah, and I think the first slides that were about like what the state says, what the local stuff is, like we can't change something. We can't go and change something the state says. So I wanted to know that, what the state actually said, so that when we make our process, we're not contradicting something to that. So that's, I mean, that was not any scope creep, if we keep using our scope creep term.
Yeah, I guess.
Commissioner Gordon.
Well, just again, Steph, y'all great. This helped me. I don't even know how we even do stuff without this kind of information, period. I agree with you. We were tasked with the process.
Yeah.
You can't do anything.
Oh, yeah.
Without this kind of information.
Oh, no.
And
I agree.
and so I don't know where you were headed with this. So and maybe that's the next thing.
Well, I'm headed that those next steps are not the things, those are next steps that we're not supposed to do.
Okay.
that's all I'm saying.
Okay,
That's all I'm
so
saying.
then here, and then here,
Mhm.
and that's where I'm going back. What are you recommending? Because I'm in agreement with you, but what is our next steps as this committee?
Our next step is to, that's why I said, focus on this process for creating a new one and amending one, not the recommendation of a new one or an amendment to a new one, but the process for doing that, because that's what was asked for in it.
What if you?
Steps, back to your chat, I mean, I'd say that in a very, I'm not being sarcastic. For me, a process is steps. So it's like,
That's what I'm asking
Yeah,
you.
and
I'm asking you, has nothing, this is the LRC.
Yeah, yeah.
We done got all this information.
Right.
What do you, as the,
Chair, I'm
Chair,
saying the
what would be
steps
the
in the,
next step?
evaluating a process, steps in the process.
We can-
We have to
will-
create the
We will
words.
bring the process back to y'all. So we will create a draft process and we'll bring boxes of
Okay,
step one,
okay.
step two.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
all I'm
Because
saying.
at the end of the day, you keep saying, we're supposed to do the I want to see the next step of the process.
Well, that's all I'm
And I
asking
thought, and
for.
I thought you were alluding to that you had the next step.
Oh, no, 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 no. I'm saying staff usually, like they bring us an
Okay,
ordinance
that-
language.
that-
Yeah, no, I am.
The way I was hearing you, that you had a great idea of the next.
No.
step.
I just had the great idea to work just on the
Okay,
process
good,
rather
good.
than all the other things.
We'll bring something back, a step-by-step process, and we will let y'all react to step one, step two, step three.
That's, that, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I'm glad for the clarity, because I thought you wanted us to leave here with a
No,
recommendation
no.
to come to the commission on our, okay. I got you.
No.
Okay, I'm good.
But I should have been direct. I want the staff to help us out by bringing us those steps numbered that we would use here, and then we'll evaluate that. So that's there.
And
Commissioner Hall.
If I may, my last meeting with you all, I just want to, for what it's worth, if we go to the previous slide.
Yeah.
Sounds like y'all are gonna mostly work on this probably outside of the committee, but I'll just say, like, for what it's worth, my take on this slide, I really like all of the suggestions except the remove the goals and the refocus. And it's not that I don't necessarily like those, I just think it's important, and so this is mostly for my colleagues, I guess, to think about in addition to staff, but like, we need to understand that if that removing the goals from their application is going to happen, how then are we collecting and analyzing any information around them actually aligning with our goals? And I think that needs to be spelled out if this is really just about taking it out of their like front end application. And that kind of relates to my question around the refocus. Because like, while it is true that any development is an improvement on like a blighted lot or something, that doesn't necessarily mean that any development deserves taxpayer kickbacks. So I'm just curious like how that slide translates into changing how flexible we are with just handing out, TAD money. So for y'all to
We'll
consider.
consider that. We'll consider that and think about that.
I would like to hear, the pros and the cons of combining down the road.
Right,
I know it's not part of the process.
right.
But I would like for us to weigh in on the pros and the cons.
And me too. Do you have a motion? Any other discussion?
We just want to thank y'all.
let's, Oh, thank you all. Let's confirm the date, for our next meeting.
I'm not confirming anything. I'll wait until you tell me, and then I'll try to work
Oh,
here.
let's-
So,
well, let's throw out a date for our next meeting, which is, the next meeting, and I only bring that up because I was at another meeting and the next meeting is like the
day of New Year's.
the day of
Yeah.
New Year's, which is
Or the
not
third.
going to, work. So, should we, I guess I'll follow up, either have a meeting on the following week or postpone that till February, because there's a lot of flux and that might be the best thing. Let's just go ahead and do that right now. There's a lot of flux in a lot of areas. Let's put the next one in February and pick up in February, okay?
So February 6th.
Yeah,
sounds great.
sounds good. You're good with that, confirming on that? Okay, good. And could you send that, I'll send that out, yeah.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
See ya.